Okay. All right, everybody, we're back. We're going to dig into Chapter 4, Human Interaction and the Socialization Process. So to read a little bit, a direct consequence of man's nature of being a social animal is that he has to associate himself with people of his liking while continuing to remain in his society. He may associate himself with one or two or a number of persons. And down here, in the following pages, we're going to examine the interaction of species, which a big models is chemical species, and the consequent proportional change in the properties. So over here, Big says the association with one may be considered similar to formation of a dimer. So a dimer is that's a bond of two species connected, bonded. Okay. With two as a trimer with three, and polymer is more than four or more. The species. So here we see the first person speaking about the human polymer. This is the species forming the dimer, trimer, or polymer would coexist with one another in the framework of the solution or a society. Their coexistence would depend on a series of complicated equilibria determined by a number of factors chiefly involved in intermolecular forces or human behavior under different sets of conditions. So this is a real good quote right here. And we're going to skim down here to a society is thus composed of individuals who interact and socialize under the conditions of the above type. These interactions are similar to intermolecular forces which bring about a clustering of molecules. So big here is viewing society as a kind of a liquid system, but the molecules, people are a molecule in this system, and they can cluster together to form dimers, trimers, and polymers. And here he says, by his very nature, man is guided by positive and negative forces, which constitute his desires and fears, respectively. Desires motivate a person to achieve objectives, while fears repel him away from his attainments. A mix of these forces is the essential life process, and it determines whether the individual should continue to live in the society or he should evaporate off. The last process, namely evaporation from a certain system, such as a solution, is governed by physical-chemical laws, and it depends on the cohesive forces among the components. And he says an interacting mix of these forces changes the property or behavior of the individual, which results in a shift in the equilibrium properties involved in the attraction or repulsion. So this one here, you say, what do you mean by this here? An interacting mix of these forces changes the property or behavior of the individual. So let's say when you migrated from India to Pakistan, now you're in a new system, and there's forces operating on you that changed your properties or behavior. That's correct? And that resulted in a shift in the equilibrium of the equilibrium reactions you were in. Is that correct?
That's what happened.
So when you were dropped into the
you have to change according to the living conditions here.
Oh, okay.
So either you will associate with your kins and get isolated, or remain isolated or segregated, or you mix into these people.
Oh, okay.
That mixing in
Interesting analogy. Interesting. You go to Saudi Arabia, their laws are a little restrictive.
Yeah.
And while you can actually, just go out with your wife just like that, a few years back, now Saudi Arabia is a bit liberal.
Yeah.
Yeah. So at that time, if you would actually move just like that right out without any abaya or anything, so the religious police would catch you.
Yeah.
So you had to actually adapt to their rules.
Yeah, if you went there. Yeah, I read about American families that go there and they have to adapt to the rules of the system.
Yeah.
So So now we're getting to some now we're getting to a famous part right here. Let's see, it says they may not be able to have close friends denoted by AB formed according to reaction 4.1 and may have only a superficial contact. So here A is a grown-up member of the above family, while B is someone he is trying to be friendly with. And they collide here, according to collision theory, and they'll have an equilibrium reaction and may form the AB dimer. So let's take a look here. Because this is where did this model come from in your mind? Because this equation 4.1 is the first non-Goethe based human chemical reaction model, historically speaking, as far as I know.
When we came here, for example, there is no friends, only the kids.
Mm-hmm.
Then reaction had to start. Going to the market, coming across the shopkeeper. The shopkeeper introducing us to somebody, then the interaction will start. But the bond formation will not take place. AB formation will not take place. If it does, it will be of temporary nature. You will need something else, some commonality. Then only this will be.
Do you have the pointer for me? Pointer? Where's the pointer?
I do.
for me?
I do.
Mirza needs his tool.
Yeah, any kind of. Assalamu alaikum.
Oh, welcome. Okay, so here, just to explain to everybody, to give a little historical digression on this, because this is a very famous point in its history right now, is the first person that I'm unaware of, out of the thousands of people I've read about, to apply, this is called human chemical reaction theory. So A is a chemical species, B is a chemical species, and they're may form the equilibrium reaction, AB dimer as Big calls them. So we're going to take a look at the Goethe timeline, just to show how Goethe came to develop his formulation of the ABCD reaction. So this is the timeline of the start formation of Goethe as a person to his cessation. So right here we see that Goethe was born from these parents here and these grandparents. This was his father, was lawyer, and his mother here. So here we say, since Goethe viewed everything chemically, so we have to use physical-chemical neutral terminology. And this was one of the first times that I actually started to use physical-chemical neutral terminology in respect for Goethe, because I knew from he's the leading genius in the world, and he spent all of his years trying to understand social phenomena in terms of chemical reactions. So here we have, instead of saying this is Goethe's life, we say it's Goethe's reaction existence. So we all agree that he is a chemical entity, he had reactions with people, and he existed. There's no confusion in the words here. So if we go right here, this is his synthesis point, August 28, 1749, instead of his birth point. But then we go a little further here, and we see him at age he starts his university studies at 16. Let's see, where does the chemical start? So right here at age 18, he starts his chemical studies and experiments. So he's sent home from the university for a convalescent year at home in bed. And during his years, he's tutored by Susan Klitterberg, and she teaches him Paracelsus. You're familiar with Paracelsus? And he starts conducting chemical experiments in his attic by burning things and trying to figure out the principles that permeate the universe, as he later speaks about. And then shortly thereafter, he wants to understand how the universe works. He says, I perceived something in nature, whether living or lifeless, whether animate or inanimate, that manifests itself only in contradictions. Therefore, it could not be expressed in any concept, much less any word. It was not divine, for it seemed irrational, not human, for it had no intelligence, nor diabolical, for it was beneficial, and not angelic, for it often betrayed malice. It was like chance, and for it laced continuity, and like providence, it suggested context. And he says that everything that limits us seemed penetrable by it, and it appears to dispose at will over the elements necessary to our existence. Contract time, and expand space, it seemed only to accept the impossible and scornfully to reject the impossible. So we see that he's already struggling with the... So on right here, in age... this was before Darwin. He was struggling with how the fact that the human has a similar morphological shape to the animals. So humans have a similar shape to apes, and it goes down. So in his day, people said that humans couldn't be related to other animals because humans lack an intermaxillary bone. So Goethe started searching for skulls of animals, and he discovered the human intermaxillary bone, which also is found in animals, that shows that he gave proof that there's a connection between humans and other animals. But then when we get up to the chemical theory over here, and so in 1785 is when the 1775 right here, that's when Torbern Bergman, the Swedish chemist, introduced his dissertation on elective attractions. Remember the affinity tables we looked at yesterday? The affinity tables? So Torbern Bergman in 1775, he published the biggest affinity table, and it's a fold-out sheet that expands about this long when you spread it out. So in his book, he introduced the notation A, B, C, D for chemicals instead of the alchemical symbols. So in 1785, that was published in Germany. So in that year, Goethe started working with Friedrich Schiller, and they started working on their ideas on how chemical affinity scales up to the social level. So he says, for example, as well as I can, from what I learned from reading about affinities some 10 years ago, whether the scientific world still thinks of it the same way, or whether it agrees with the latest theories, I cannot say. And then we see Goethe's notes on affinity right here, where he has species AB reacting with species CD, the bonding bracket here, and he's got the alchemical symbols, and he forms the new bonding brackets over here, AB and CD, that precipitates out the liquid solution, and this goes off in a gas phase solution. And then in 1796, he gives his third lecture on anatomy, where he starts, he states, to facilitate our comprehension of the concept of an organic existence. So you notice here he says, instead of saying living existence, he says organic existence. He says, let us first take a look at mineral structures. Minerals whose varied components are so solid and unchanging do not seem to hold any limits or order when they combine. Although laws do determine these conditions, different components can easily be separated and recombined into new combinations, and these combinations can again be taken apart. And the mineral we thought destroyed can soon be restored to its original perfection. And then he goes down here and he says that these characteristics, these bonds, stronger or weaker, there are by nature stronger or weaker bonds between these components, and when they evidence themselves, they resemble attractions between human beings. So this is 1796, he's age 47, and he's starting to think about the minerals reacting as the way that people react in terms of A, B, C, D. So big, you're he's the first person that wrote these diagrams. So then he ends up, here we see he made his affinity table in 1708, and then he published elective affinities in 1809. Now, one thing that's here we see that
What's up?
oh, tea time?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, let's take pause.
Are they?
Start, stop.